And
Sure.
first of all, I'd like you to introduce yourself and give a little bit of a background on um, what Mom Stop the Harm is, and then, if you're comfortable, tell about your story and how you became involved with Mom Stop the
Sure.
Harm because of that.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I became involved with Mom Stop the Harm in, I guess, 2021. And I've just got some notes about Mom Stop the Harm just so I get the key points in. So Mom Stop the Harm, it's a network of Canadian families and loved ones who have been impacted by drug-related harms and death. It was founded in 2016 by three moms, hence the name, moms who'd lost children to drug harms. And since then, it's grown to over how many thousand, several thousand individuals and families across Canada. So it's become bigger, which is good because it's an organization that provides a lot of support. But the reason that we've grown is not so great, as you know. Mom Stop the Harm has sort of two arms. There's the advocacy arm, and in our advocacy work, we challenge the law, basically the laws and the policies that cause harm that are at the root of the rising and continuing deaths across Canada due to drug harms. We call for an end to the failed war on drugs and through evidence-based prevention, treatment, and policy change. And we support an approach that reduces the harms associated with drugs and that connects people to compassionate care. No judgment, no stigma. There's a lot of that around these days, so
Yes.
we're trying to fight that. Mom Stop the Harm also has a support arm, and then there are two groups. There's the Holding Hope groups, which provides peer support for families and loved ones who have loved ones who are either using or have used in the past. Provides a safe place to talk about some of the concerns and issues and challenges that brings. And then Healing Hearts is a peer support group that provides bereavement support to families and loved ones who have lost people to drug harms. And that's sort of how I discovered Mom Stop the Harm. I'd heard about it. And I started going to a Healing Hearts group, and it's really helpful because given the stigma around drug use and people who use drugs, there's a lot of discrimination, and the Healing Hearts groups provide a safe place to just talk about it and know that everybody else in the group, while their circumstances might be completely different, they get it. So getting to me, my youngest son, Trevor, this is the hard part. My youngest son, Trevor, died from accidental drug poisoning in August 2020, right in the middle of the pandemic. He was 25. He lived in Kincardine. He was living and working in Kincardine. He was a wind turbine technician, so he worked on the turbines in the area there. He was kind, he was loving, he was playful. He had a great sense of humor, a really sharp wit. He was valued in his career. And he went through a tough bit during the pandemic, as a lot of people did. And Trevor did not have a history of problematic substance use. So that's a point I want to make really clearly, because he's not part of the group of, people who are struggling with substance use. If I, I have a zillion questions that I'll never be able to ask him, and I don't want to make assumptions or speak for him. My guess is that he was having a tough time, and maybe using drugs was helping him cope. And next thing we knew, he was gone. We knew him to use alcohol as we do, and cannabis, but and I think he was someone he was curious. I think he experimented. I think maybe he used other things recreationally, but it had never been a problem for him. So as you can imagine, it was a shock to us. We knew he was going through a tough time, but we had no idea that he was using anything more than alcohol and cannabis. So yeah, he died alone in his home. And so, yeah, so then I sort of stumbled across Mom Stop the Harm, I guess a little bit after that. And I'm not an expert in drugs, in using drugs, or in drug policy. I've not traveled that awful and heartrending road of supporting someone who has problems with substance use. So I can't speak from that experience. But the more I learned after Trevor's death, the more I saw the harms that are how discriminatory our policies are, and the harms that prohibition is causing, and having experienced that directly too. So, it's too late for Trevor. But I felt compelled to become involved because I want to honor him and the life that was stolen from him by pushing for change. One of the things that I learned in that horrifying first year was that when you lose a child, you don't stop being their parent. What you have to figure out, and the really hard thing, is to figure out how to parent them when they're gone. And I guess part of me thinks that maybe this is one way that I can continue to parent Trevor, to be a voice for him, and try and prevent or stop, which is a tough job, the deaths that are just continuing across the country.
Yeah. And when you say across the country, it's not like in some of this, I refer to things in BC.
Mhm.
But when I was listening to you there, right, I might have bumped into Trevor. I was working for the Kincardine Independent around that time, writing
Wow.
news for that.
Yeah.
So I might have even wrote something about that, but yeah, so
Bumped into him in
it's
the convenience store or something. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Um and that experience, it is definitely, you saw my one of my sons pop in. I have young sons who are just getting out and entering the world themselves, and that's something none of us really
No.
want
No.
ever to experience or need to experience. A lot of people, when they experience what you've experienced, they also um, get very angry and maybe want to come down hard and be part of the tough war on drugs side of it. But that's obviously not the path you've taken. So why do you feel the more compassionate side or path is the better way to go for you?
I guess because the more I learn, and unfortunately, it's knowledge I wish I had before Trevor died. Like back when he was a teenager, I can tell you the conversations would have been very different. The hard line, I mean, it's not working. People are, the death toll is continuing. And I guess what I've realized is that um, we've, and it's something we've grown up with. So it took a while for me to realize that we've grown up with this idea that um, people who use drugs are bad. There's a moral issue there. It's a bad choice. And so, if you make that choice, then well, you're going to suffer the consequences. But what we I guess forget or don't realize is that there are other things like alcohol, for example. I mean, there was prohibition of alcohol quite some years ago, and that didn't work. So why do we think that it's going to work with drugs? And so alcohol, the prohibition was repealed, and now, our alcohol is extremely promoted, and in some cases, you're almost looked down on if you don't have a drink because, what's the matter with you? Don't you want to have fun? And yet, drugs are looked at completely different, and people use drugs for a variety of reasons. It's not a, nobody chooses to become addicted or on the fringes of a society, or subject to the judgy glances from people as they walk by and realize that, oh, this is a person who uses drugs. They're they use drugs for people start using drugs for all kinds of reasons, whether it's just at a party to have some fun and to experience a bit of a different feeling, or to help them cope with trauma, or even like social situations can be awkward for people, and sometimes drugs can help with that. I mean, I know when I have a glass of wine, I feel a little bit freer, a little bit, more confident. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I think heavy-handed methods, I mean, we've been trying that with like criminalization and prohibition and all the consequences, and it's not working, and it's just fueling the what's killing people is the toxic drug supply, the street supply that people are I can't find the word. They don't have a choice except to go to the street supply because it's not legal. So what we have to do is provide a supply that's not killing people, and then deal with the other stuff. If people have, some mental health problems or coping problems or whatever has led them to problematic drug use, if it's problematic, help them with that. But it's not problematic for everyone.
The pushback that comes when ideas like decriminalization come up. Like there was a good example in Canada when BC was introducing their pilot program, because on the news cycle, within 24 hours, he was standing with the Lower East Side behind him, calling it a hell on earth and saying that this policy had caused that. But we all know there's quite a history to that area of Vancouver, and it wasn't caused by that overnight. Like
A decrim pilot, which was what, like a few hours old at that point, like that.
yeah, he was out there, and look at what's behind me. It wasn't like this yesterday. But that sort of pushback ends up pressing for like a abstinence only kind of solution. But like you were saying, there's more to it than that. There is treatment. Some people really do need treatment, but safer supply and safe injection sites and things like that, and mental health supports ongoing after treatment are very important. How do you feel that pushback with that kind of single-minded pushback is damaging to the movement to bring in other supports?
I feel it's very damaging, and it scares me to think that, we might be looking at a conservative government down the road, the way they're talking about responding to the drug poisoning crisis, because a lot of what Polyev and I guess his supporters and other people who are sort of following that line of thinking are saying is it's not based on evidence. It's misinformation, and it's sort of manipulating the public. The public does a lot of the public doesn't realize or doesn't understand, and this kind of rhetoric doesn't help them. It paints a picture of situations like the downtown east side, and that, this is, if we don't crack down on drugs, and it's going to get even worse. Well, I think the crackdown has led to where things are at right now in places like that. And so cracking down even harder is not gonna, we know it doesn't work. Providing like safe consumption sites, for example, not only do they provide, like keep people alive so that if they need or want treatment, or when they're ready for treatment, they're actually alive to go and go for it. But safe consumption sites hook people into all kinds of other supports. It connects them with, first of all, with people who care, people who aren't judging them. And if they, it helps them get into, maybe some mental health supports if they need that, or other health supports, social supports. And from what I've heard, people who are using safe supply or, safe consumption sites, it helps them improve other areas of their life. It helps them find a job or get housing and then sort of stabilize so that they can, not always be looking for the street drugs that might kill them. There was something else I was I listened to your podcast with Talia Storm, and I loved what she made. So many really important points about harm reduction and safe consumption sites and what that does for people. And I really liked what she said about, people who use drugs, about them being the driver, and we're in the car with them, we're in the back seat or even the passenger seat, but we're passengers to support them, provide or assist with directions if and when they want it. But they're the driver. They know who they are and what they need and what they want and how to get there, and we help them. And I think that's a really good metaphor for how we help people in any situation. It doesn't have to be someone who's struggling with drugs. Any situation where they're struggling, they're the driver, we're along for the ride, and we help them, give them direction if they need it and want it.
Okay. It's another fear-mongering tactic that seems to be used. The idea that safe supply is getting diverted and ending up just going to the streets so that the drug users who want something stronger can go get their fentanyl or whatever. But that hydromorphine and Dilaudid are ending up in the hands of our children for $1 a pop or something like that. And that's what's causing the overdose crisis. Again, like, these ideas are such strong fear-mongering, but they're not really the reality of the situation.
No, and they're not based on evidence. Absolutely not.
Yeah. I'm gonna ask you to speak, even though you're not an expert, a little more specifically about safer supply and the benefits and what that does for us in reality, as opposed to just getting to the street and getting into the hands of our children or whatever we're getting told.
Okay. Yeah, safer supply, and I know that's a term that's being thrown around a lot, and it's sort of being tainted, I guess, in a sense, by the rhetoric and the political sphere. But really what it is an alternative to the street supply, the poison street supply. So what that does is give people the drugs that they want, and if they have a dependence that they need, without, the risk of it killing them or doing some severe brain damage or whatever. Good conversation, but one of the things to keep in mind is that diversion isn't a new thing. I mean, people have been sharing or selling or whatever their drugs, whatever it is, whether it's pharmaceuticals or prescriptions or something, they get off the street for years. Kids have been raiding their parents' medicine cabinets for years. Like it's not the result of harm reduction approaches such as safer supply and that sort of thing. What it could suggest is that people who are receiving safer supply, whatever that is, it's very controlled, and often, from what I understand, it's not what they want. It's not a replacement for what they're actually using or maybe have a dependence on, if that's the case. So they might be, in some cases, they might be selling it or to then get what they really need, what's going to, keep the withdrawal from them.
Yep.
In other cases, like the people who use drugs, the communities, they're people that take care of themselves because the system is not. right? So they'd rather, if somebody, I've heard stories of someone who has safer supply sharing it with a friend who really needs something because they don't want them to, be at risk of using from the street supply and then maybe, having an overdose. So in some cases it's that, but it's not, and I don't know, in my mind, if it was my kid on the street, I'd rather him use some of somebody else's safer supply than
Mhm.
what's being sold on the street, the toxic supply on the street.
Yeah, and I've also been hearing that like the streets are not flooded with it,
No,
like we're hearing,
no,
because the a lot of the programs are too small to meet the demand
yeah.
of
And that's the other
the
thing, the
need.
people that do have access to safe supply, like I think I heard a stat out of BC, I think it was, that less than 5% of the people who could benefit from safe supply have access to it. So that's a small number. So how can you make, sweeping generalizations or statements about, oh, it's clearly not working? Because look, we still have, you know, what's going on the downtown east side. Well, probably most of those people don't have access. So it's not, they're not benefiting from any harm reduction efforts.
Um, Conservative Party has been saying if they win the next election, which they very well might, um, they will come down extremely hard on drug users and traffickers. Um, there, there's been we've all seen the evidence and read about it and talked to people about it, that just leads to like when one supplier is taken off the streets, another one will step in, and quite often it'll be uh, with drugs that are more contaminated than the last, and or maybe just contaminated with something different, and people won't be
Mhm.
expecting it. So the question I'm getting at is how these harsh um, policies, and quite often they dehumanize drug users in their language, um, uh, and encourage people and police at times to dehumanize as well. Um, i- is there a way you would suggest making these policies, even if we can't get them to stop making these policies, is there a way that they could be more sympathetic to drug users instead of dehumanizing? And
I think the best way to do that is to involve people who use drugs in the policy development. Um, as you know, I worked in policy. I worked in staffing policy with the federal government, which is a whole other different domain than what we're talking about here. So not a lot that I can, take from staffing policy to this. But the one thing I did learn over and over again is that any policy that you're developing or even maintaining, it has to be done in consultation with direct consultation with the people that are going to be affected by it. Like you can't write a policy and then throw it out there that has, nothing, no consultation, no talking to the people that are going to be affected by it. Throw it out there and expect it to work, to do it, what you want it to do. Um, and the and I really, and then sort of working in this realm or getting involved in this really drove that home. In the case of people who use drugs, they are the experts. They know what's going on in the drug world. They know what the challenges are. They have all this lived experience that um, we really need in order to develop drug policies that are not dehumanizing, that take their needs into consideration, that are humane, respectful, that don't discriminate, and that don't stigmatize. Um, all drug policy right now is just, it's got this kind of underpinning of, if you use drugs, you're bad. So we decide, government knows best, or whoever knows best, we decide how we're going to deal with you because of this decision or choice or whatever that you've made. And that doesn't help anybody.
Yeah.
So that's what I
Yeah.
would say. Yeah, the importance of and even when you're talking to people on this subject, and I know you've talked to people you talked, I've Eris Nix and Garth Mullins and people like that who have a lot to say and a lot of really good experience and knowledge to share that could really inform drug policy going forward.
And they both of them were always saying the line that drug activists use. I believe it's nothing about us without
Without
us.
us.
Yeah,
Yep, that's it.
and
Yep.
that's I totally agree with that. I'm
And that's
not
something
a
that Don't Stop the Harm believes very, very strongly in, that people who use drugs have to be at the forefront of drug policy and dealing with the situation.
treatment first approaches uh don't seem to take into account the failure rate of treatment too,
Mm,
and the wait times, and the fact that a large number of people who overdosed have not been heavy users. They're often first time or
yeah.
weekend warriors. So it seems that the tendency for politicians who are making decisions that affect people's lives, they ignore the evidence, the science, and data. Um, do you have something that you'd like to? I mean, you kind of just maybe said that in your last answer, but directly to, and it sounds like your son might have been one of these people who
Mhm.
wasn't um a, a big user, and then it happened.
Yeah.
Do you have a message to the politicians on that side of it?
Yeah. Yeah, forced treatment, or yeah, because there, and especially in Alberta, there's a lot of talk about, this is the solution. Um, and I know there are people who have gone or been sent to forced or abstinence-based treatment, and it's worked for them. So I don't want to say it's no good. I know it works for some people, but like everything, every person is different, and what works for one person on anything, drugs included, might not work for someone else, or might work with some tweaking. So as far as treatment goes, I think treatment's important, and there needs to be treatment available and accessible for people when they're ready for it. Um, as you said, the success rates of forced treatment and in some cases abstinence-based treatment aren't great. And one of the problems is that for forced treatment, if someone's forced into treatment and abstinence-based treatment, and when they weren't ready for it, it wasn't something that they felt they needed at that time, then once they come out, if they relapse, which is probably pretty likely if they weren't ready for it in the first place, their tolerance is way down, and the possibility of overdose is even higher than it was before. Add in the fact that the the toxicity of the street drugs it just keeps going up and up. Yeah, so I think treatment has to be available because it does work for some, but not forced, when people are ready for it, when they need it, when they want it. And then in the meantime, there's a whole toolbox of things that can be available for people, and like health support, social service supports. Because some people, they may want to, like, abstinence may not be part of their plan. I think there's a lot of people that use drugs and don't have any problem with it. And they, as you said, they might use on the weekend, or maybe, in the evening after a tough day at work, just to relax, like many people use alcohol, and it's not a problem for them. But so we can't we can't say that treatment is a solution because, as you say, that wouldn't have helped Trevor. Trevor wouldn't have qualified for, he wouldn't have been eligible for treatment if it was available. And there are people in the numbers are staggering. I think the latest was since 2016, it's like close to 43,000 Canadians have died from drug poisoning. Men between the ages of, I think it's 20 and 59 are in the high proportion there. And I mean, these are catastrophic numbers, and they're not going to go, I mean, they just keep going up. So until and all the talk about, forced treatment and cracking down, that's not, I mean, here we are.
Okay.
It scares me to think that might be sort of where all the money is going in terms of trying to deal with this crisis, because we're just going to lose so many more people.
Yeah.
22 a day right now.
Yeah. And I mean, it's a sad thing to think of, because most of us, even if we haven't lost someone close, like right within our family, there's like, I can think of several people who I used to meet and know, and they're all gone.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I think we've hit on all the points I wanted to hit on. Is there anything else you want to get out there or say to people?
Yeah, I guess in addition, just to emphasize that the drug poisoning crisis, it's not an addictions crisis. It's a direct result of the toxic street supply, which kind of flows from prohibition. So what we need to stop the death toll is regulation, legal regulated supply of drugs that are an alternative to what's on the street in the short term to stop the deaths. And along with that support, compassionate support for people who want it, and care and connection to help people deal with life is pretty hard these days, and for everybody and for all kinds of reasons. And then access to treatment when people are ready for it and if they want it. And then long-term decriminalization of people who use drugs, which requires a whole lot of legislation, but that's going to help address the stigma. Because I think in Trevor's case, if there wasn't the stigma around drug use and the criminalization, he might have talked about it. He wouldn't have been buying his drugs off the dark web. He would have known exactly what he had and what he was taking. And, he would most likely still be here today to live the beautiful life that was stretching out ahead of him.
First of all, can you tell me some of the failings you see in an approach that singularly focuses on treatment?
Absolutely, yeah. It's an approach that excludes a number of people. So as I had explained to you, my son Trevor he did not have a diagnosis or a problematic substance use. So treatment, I mean, right there, he would not have been eligible for treatment. What's killing people is the toxic drug supply, the street supply that is loaded with well, people don't know what they're taking when they buy it. And there's a number, people are using drugs who are also living full and productive lives, as my son was. There are kids experiment, we can't we can't deny that. Kids are going to experiment with drugs. Students use drugs to stay awake, to study, to party. And I would say that professionals use drugs as well. I'm hearing more and more that, like people with a very hectic work work personal life balance or working a lot of hours need to sort of find that sometimes that drugs help them stay on top of things. And we have people who use recreationally on the weekend or in the evening or whatever, who do not have a substance use disorder diagnosis. So a recovery oriented or treatment oriented approach excludes those people. So right away, there's a whole bunch of people that are not protected from the toxic street supply, because that is what is killing people. And then the other thing is that a recovery-oriented approach sort of waits until somebody has a diagnosis of a substance use disorder before they're given any help or assistance or whatever, and also assumes that they're ready and wanting treatment, and that recovery or abstinence is what they want, and we can't assume that for anybody. So it waits until there's a substance use disorder diagnosis, and then avoids or doesn't allow for the opportunity for early intervention. So somebody who's maybe doesn't have a substance use disorder diagnosis, but is maybe headed in that direction, maybe using more and more, finding that drugs are becoming more of a coping mechanism than is healthy, with approaches that sort of meet people where they're at and respond to the current situation. We can start addressing some of those things, or work with people to get counseling or social supports or whatever help they might need to not end up with a substance use disorder diagnosis. And interestingly, just last night, I saw, I think, an article in the St. Albert Gazette, talking about Alberta's blaming the so-called addictions crisis for the death toll. But this article is saying that data over the last 10 years does not show an increase in substance use disorder diagnoses, yet the death toll is going up. So there's a bit of an imbalance there, I guess. So yeah, that's how I would answer that question. It's it's one thing. And like, as with a lot of things, there's rarely one solution to fit everyone. We can't take a cookie cutter approach to apply to everybody's different, like every fingerprint is different. So
Yep. Yeah. And in there, you were talking about people who feel they're not ready for treatment or abstinence. And sometimes when that's the only approach given, it seems to allow that stigma that if you don't want it, you're bad. You're a drug fiend or
yeah,
something.
exactly. Here, we're trying to help you, and you obviously don't want our help. So, whatever happens to you is your fault as a result of this choice. Yeah, absolutely perpetuates the stigma, the judgment, the discrimination. Yeah.
Mhm. So, and then, is there any other points that you want to leave with?
Yeah, I would just like to talk a little bit about harm reduction, what it is and what it is not, especially in the face of the misinformation that is being bandied about in the political sphere. I see that Polyev was at it again yesterday, going on about how the government's handing out free drugs and all that kind of thing, which is not. That's one thing harm reduction is not. The people who are receiving safe supply, it's very regulated. It's not just being handed out like, from an ice cream truck. It's not being handed out to kids. Harm reduction is, and specifically safer supply, or another word for it is regulated alternative to the toxic street supply. It's not that in its harm reduction is not causing substance use disorder, and it's not increasing drug use. It's actually put in place in response to an increase in deaths from drug use. What it is, it's not new. And it's essentially approaches to reduce harm, recognizing that some activities or behavior carry some risks, and putting in place some safeguards to mitigate those risks. For example, driving. Driving is risky, so one of the harm reduction technique is seatbelts. We're all required to wear seatbelts. Boating can be risky, so we wear life jackets. Biking can be risky, so we wear helmets to prevent brain damage from a fall. So these are examples outside the drug use context. Within the drug use context, it's strategies and approaches to help manage the risk, particularly like safer supplies, I mentioned, to protect people from the street supply. We see the war, prohibition, criminalization, the war on drugs. It's not working. It's increasing the stigma, the discrimination, and the judgment towards people who use drugs. It's pushing drug use into the shadows and into secrecy, so people are using alone and not getting the help that they might need, or help should an overdose happen. And one of the things I don't think I mentioned earlier is the iron law of prohibition, which it's an unwritten law, but it says that the tougher the sanctions against drug use, the more toxic the drugs become, the more crime there is, and crime becomes more violent. And we're seeing this. Initially it was more the issue around drug deaths was fentanyl coming into the drug supply. Now we're seeing benzodiazepines, which don't respond to naloxone, so that creates a bit of a quandary, or makes it more difficult to reverse an overdose. We're seeing animal tranquilizers come into the drug supply now, and that's going to increase. So what harm reduction in the drug context does is it gives people agency. It includes a number of tools. Safer supply or regulated alternatives is only one of those. It includes education, naloxone, safe consumption sites, and one of the really important things is, I believe, is that it connects people to people who care, for starters, social and health supports, and treatment. Harm reduction is not against treatment. It's not harm reduction or treatment. Treatment is a valuable tool for people who are ready for it and who want it. So yeah, people who have access to harm reduction also have access to a whole bunch of other services and supports, and evidence that is coming in is showing that people are reporting improved quality of life. I've heard, testimonials, people saying, yeah, I was able to get housing. I was able to find and hold down a job. I was able to spend time with my family, the important people. It's the people who have kids. I was able to spend time with my kids instead of, running around to look for the next, the street supply and that sort of thing. So, yeah, that would be my really think about harm reduction. It's not giving out free drugs. It's not increasing the drug use. Those are happening for other reasons. Harm reduction is to keep people safe, to reduce harm, plain and simple, and it works.
Okay, yeah. And it's strange to me that anyone can argue against keeping people safe. It's
Yeah, it's mind-boggling.
yeah. All right.